So, have you ever been, watching the news or maybe reading some political analysis and you just get this nagging, almost sinking feeling?
Mm.
It's not really about which side is winning or losing. It's more about the pace of
I
everything.
pace, yeah. Everything feels so reactive.
Exactly. Reactive, fragile, and just completely focused on the next hour, the next tweet, or maybe the next news cycle if we're lucky.
And you see this constant churn, this inability to stick with any kind of long-term plan.
And our first thought, my first thought anyway, is always to jump to something simple. It must be a failure of character.
Right. The people in power, they're just not serious enough, or they've become impatient, or they lack vision. That's the go-to explanation.
Exactly. But that assumption that it's just a personal failing, it feels a bit too easy, doesn't it?
It is. And before we make that leap,
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to ask a quieter, but maybe a much more important structural question.
Mm.
Did the environment that politicians operate in change? I mean, fundamentally. Because if the whole ecosystem transformed, then the behavior we're seeing, all that urgency, the short-termism, it might actually be a logical adaptation.
A predictable adaptation, you
A
mean?
predictable adaptation. It might be less about personal shortcomings and more about, well, career survivability.
And that right there is the core mission of this deep dive. We're trying to move beyond just talking about short-termism as a mood.
That vague feeling.
Yeah, that vague feeling that everything's compressed and brittle and, decisions feel rushed, plans feel provisional. It's too slippery to really analyze.
Right. So the sources we've been looking at, they try to find something concrete, measurable signals where those shifting incentives have actually hardened into real structural patterns.
We're looking for objective evidence, proof that the system has quietly adjusted.
And the most compelling signal we found, it's sort of hidden in plain sight. It's the churn rate, the tenure of people in the most senior government roles,
You mean secretaries of state?
specifically secretaries of state. The people running these massive government departments, health, education, defense, these are the roles where continuity isn't some luxury. It's a prerequisite for any kind of effective long-term policy.
Of course. I mean, if you can't keep a policy leader in place for more than a year or two.
You're fundamentally undermining the department's ability to plan for the next decade. It's that simple.
So, to figure out if these roles have really become more short term, the researchers had to be pretty clever about how they measured it. They didn't just, look at history as one smooth, continuous line.
No, that would just muddy the data. Instead, they treat each general election as a firm reset point,
Even if the same party wins again.
especially if the same party wins. Politically, that's often the moment a leader feels the most pressure to, refresh the cabinet. It's a clean break. And using those reset points lets you compare, say, a 1970s administration against a 2010s one on truly equal footing.
And that structured approach gives us two different, but I guess interconnected ways of looking at this. So, let's start with the first one, flow or churn.
Right.
This is captured in what we'll call chart one. It basically tracks the sheer number of different people passing through these senior roles per year. And it's all normalized for the different lengths of parliaments.
So the question is simple. During any given parliamentary session, just how fast were the faces changing?
And when you look at that data mapped out, it's pretty astonishing how contained the movement was in the earlier periods.
It really is. I mean, of course, there was movement ministers were sacked or promoted, but for the most part, those bars showing the turnover are relatively low. They're stable.
But then something happens right around the mid 1990s, and it's not a slow creep. It looks like a really abrupt, visible shift in the whole baseline.
That's the critical observation. The data doesn't just show a temporary spike, like you'd expect during a single chaotic crisis,
Yeah.
and then things settle back down.
No, it's different.
It's completely different. The bars literally step up around the mid-90s, and then they stay up. It's like the gravitational field just permanently shifted.
So what we're seeing is a structural shift, a new normal of faster cycling.
Exactly. The system itself now seems to have a built-in expectation of faster rotation. That pressure for turnover has become systemic.
Which is such a paradox, right? Because it implies that stability itself is just harder to achieve no matter who's in charge. So we have to look at the context. The research is careful to note this shift coincides almost perfectly with huge changes in media exposure.
Absolutely. Just think about the timeline for a second. We go from the, relative intimacy of radio and limited newspapers,
To cameras in the commons making every single interaction visual.
and then the real game changer, the 24-hour rolling news cycle that just demands constant content. And from there, Well, it's the clip-driven social media world we're all in today.
I think it's important to stress what the researchers are saying here. They're not saying media changes cause the churn. You can't draw a perfect straight line.
No, but they are the undeniable high-pressure context. You can't separate the timing of this shift from the timing of that technological disruption. It creates this ecosystem where the political risk, the reputational cost of any misstep is amplified exponentially
It's like turning the scrutiny dial up to 11 and then breaking the knob off.
and leaving it there forever.
Okay, let's move to the second piece of evidence because this is just as important. We've established the flow is faster, so now let's flip it and look at the depth. Chart 2 tracks the actual tenure length distribution. So instead of asking how many people pass through the door, this is asking, okay, once you're in the job, how long can you realistically expect to stay?
And this just reinforces the story from the opposite direction. If
Yeah.
you look at the data from, say, the 60s, 70s, 80s, the tenures are all clustered together.
Yeah.
You had a pretty stable median length of service. Statistically, you could expect to be in the role for a predictable amount of time.
And what happens when we look at the later post-1990s elections?
You see two critical changes. First, yes, the median tenure, the average stay, it drops visibly. Ministers are just in the job for shorter periods. But the second change is actually the most institutionally damaging.
Which is?
The spread widens.
Okay, explain for the listener who can't see the chart. Why does that widening spread matter so much?
So imagine the spread as predictability. When the spread is tight, everyone knows a new Secretary of State has, say, an 80% chance of staying for at least 2.5 years. That lets you plan. You can delegate,
Sure.
but when that spread widens, the system has become highly erratic. You still have a few long survivors, the outliers who manage 5 years, but at the same time, you have this huge cluster of people who lasted less than a year.
So short tenures didn't just become possible, they became common. And the fate of any new appointee became completely unpredictable. That volatility is institutional risk.
Exactly. The system cycles people through faster, they stay for less time, and crucially, the person starting the job has no rational expectation of longevity. The two charts meet right in the middle. They confirm a fundamental shift.
Depth of service is just evaporating.
It is.
Okay, let's unpack this structural adaptation because this is really the so what moment. It is so tempting to just jump straight to blame. Blame the voters, blame the media, blame the politicians.
Right. But the research really tries to avoid that. It focuses on the consequence, not the blame. And the core finding is simple. As politics became constantly more visible, audibly, visually, fragment by fragment, the cost of staying in the role went up dramatically.
And that's the engine of the whole adaptation.
It has to be. Think about the risk profile. A big, complex department is going to make mistakes. It's going to have scandals, face pressure. 30 years ago, those issues might take days or weeks to gain traction.
But today, a single clipped moment, a misinterpreted phrase.
It travels instantly. The pressure just accumulates publicly and relentlessly.
So the calculus for the leader, the prime minister, it just shifts completely. Why did the system start rewarding turnover?
Because persistence became incredibly risky. If a Secretary of State is weathering a political storm, the longer they stay, the more political capital the leader has to burn to protect them. And the storm threatens to just engulf the whole administration.
So replacing someone, even if they're competent, feels safer than backing them. Because when attention moves so fast, refreshing the cast feels like action. It looks decisive.
Precisely. The replacement isn't always driven by bad faith or a search for someone better. It's driven by structural survivability. It's a defensive move. The leader protects themselves and the party by sacrificing the person who is the current pressure point.
So the depth of service becomes harder to defend politically than the headline you get from bringing in a new face.
And the system is just adapted to reward that speed and responsiveness, whether anyone wanted it to or not.
So if I'm following this, we've essentially engineered a system where career longevity requires either incredible luck or just an extreme form of risk aversion.
That's a great way to put it. And this is where the short view starts to create real, quantifiable damage to long-term policy.
Let's talk about policy. Something like long-term planning for, I don't know, climate change, a massive infrastructure project, complex welfare reform. It all rests on a really simple, almost fragile idea. The idea that the person making the decisions today expects to still be there when those decisions actually mature, 3, 5, 10 years down the line.
And it's fascinating how the incentive structure just quietly shifts when that fragile premise breaks.
Mm.
When tenure shortens and a minister basically expects to be gone within 2 years,
Yeah.
it becomes safer, more rational for them to focus only on things they can complete within that lifespan.
You prioritize the quick win announcement, the ribbon-cutting ceremony you know you can actually attend, not the complex reform that won't pay off politically until after the next election when you're probably long gone.
Absolutely. Those necessary long-term political risks suddenly look like personal career traps. Why would you accept a policy risk with immediate headaches for a benefit that might not even arrive for 5 years? A benefit some rival might end up claiming credit for.
So continuity becomes someone else's problem.
Exactly.
And this rapid rotation must have wider systemic implications for Parliament, for the civil service. Let's run through those areas of damage.
Okay, the first is parliamentary scrutiny. It becomes fundamentally harder to hold the executive to account when the person you're scrutinizing rotates every 18 months.
Right. How can a select committee track an ongoing failure in, say, prison reform if the minister in charge keeps changing before any strategy can even be implemented?
The instability provides a constant political shield. And the second point, which is often overlooked, is the thinning of institutional memory. The knowledge you build from experience, from navigating past storms, from understanding the nuances of a department, it's just lost. It walks out the door.
And I know the civil servants provide continuity, but
Yeah, they do. They provide professional continuity. But they can provide political legitimacy.
Yep.
They can't provide that deep contextual knowledge that comes from being the person who is ultimately responsible. When that political knowledge cycles out so quickly, the department's ability to respond intelligently just diminishes.
And the third point, policy resets. This has to be the most frustrating one for the public.
It is. Policies get abandoned not because they failed or because they were bad ideas, but simply because their sponsor changed. The new minister wants their own legacy, their own quick win.
So they scrap the last person's plan.
And you get chronic policy instability. What the sources really underscore is that this pattern persists across different administrations, different parties, different contexts. That's the crucial finding. This isn't just some temporary breakdown. It's not crisis politics.
It's a system that has fundamentally and quietly adjusted to a new reality, one where speed, visibility, and responsiveness are rewarded far more than patience or long-term vision. And that ministerial churn is the signal. It's the flashing red lights telling us where the pressure points are.
So let's bring it back to that core insight we started with. The focus here isn't on whether politicians have somehow become inherently worse than they were decades ago. I think that's a superficial way to look at it.
Right.
The real question, the crucial one, is whether the structural environment still makes long-term, high-risk, deferred payoff thinking a rational or even survivable thing for any politician to do.
And the evidence seems to show pretty clearly that these senior roles are turning over faster, they're staying shorter, and that makes long-term planning an increasingly irrational choice for the individual in power. The churn isn't the problem itself.
No, it's the symptom. It's the highly visible symptom of this high-speed political survival game.
And that leads us to the next logical question, and it's something for you, the listener, to maybe mull over the next time a political drama unfolds.
If this is the new environment, highly visible, high risk, an environment that structurally rewards turnover and short-term thinking, who does it actually attract? Who does it incentivize to climb that greasy pole?
And maybe even more importantly, who are the experienced, patient, long-term thinkers who look at those odds and quietly decide that stepping into that pressure cooker just isn't worth it at all?